Welcome to Between a Rocket and a Hard Space, the podcast focused on the innovation taking place through the International Space Station, National Laboratory, and beyond. We'll talk about R&D in space to benefit life on Earth with innovators and visionaries who dared to ask what will happen if we launch this to space. Join me, Patrick O'Neill, Public Affairs and Outreach Lead for the ISS National Lab, as we launch into the science with the people making it happen. So today's episode should be a lot of fun, as I've had the privilege of knowing and working with today's guest for almost 10 years. Arun Sharma is a STEM, heart, and space biologist, presently at Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles. He also has recently been named the director for the Center for Space Medicine Research at Cedars-Sinai, which I am sure we will get a little bit more into. But again, excited that Arun will be joining us today as we get a chance to nerd out into the fun world of space biology. So Arun, thanks for joining the program.
Hey, thanks, Patrick. Always a pleasure to chat.
So as I alluded to, it's been a journey with us. So let's start it off. Do you even remember the first time that we ran into each other?
Fortunately or unfortunately, I think I do. I think just about 10 years ago, I believe you had visited Stanford when I was a grad student there, and we were doing some kind of recording for the SpaceX CRS-9 launch that was
Yeah, it's
happening.
Niner. Yeah.
Yeah, who's counting, right? That was, I think, summer of 2016 was when that was launched, and I think the recording was either a few months or within the previous year of that. I think that's when we first got acquainted, and I think that's when you first heard about hearts and stem cells in space and beating heart cells and all that fun stuff.
You are correct. And what was funny about that too is I remember going to Stanford and Dr. Joe Wu was looked upon as the PI for that. And I was thinking, okay, I'm going to be interviewing mainly with Dr. Wu. And then no, I got to hang out with Arun all day long. And I realized at that point, wait a second, Arun's doing a lot of the work on this science. He knows a thing or two about this R&D.
Yeah, that's how how it goes sometimes in academia, right? You've got the big names supporting the work, and of course, I'm eternally grateful to Dr. Wu for letting me run with this project. I mean, he's a busy guy. He was the head of the American Heart Association not too long ago, and he's got a big lab. But when a grad student comes up to him with a crazy idea like this and sending heart cells to space, he had the courage to let me run with it, and here we are today.
We're glad that he did. And, to that end, as a grad student, what ultimately sparked your interest in saying, I want to go out there and send stem cells, heart cells to the space station?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is a personal interest in this area, and maybe we'll into this in a little bit. I grew up in a town that a lot of folks in the aerospace industry may be familiar with. It's Huntsville, Alabama, Rocket City, USA. And for the longest time, I wanted to do something at the intersection of my passions, which is biomedical research and space sciences. And I had this opportunity in grad school where, we had this grant that we could write to actually do this first project, sending stem cells to space. And, of course, we know what happens to the human body in space at the macro level. Astronauts have been going into space for decades now. We know their bones and muscles degrade. And at some level, we know what happens to their heart on the macro level as well. But there's less of an understanding of what happens at the cell level. And, just so happened what I was studying in grad school were these stem cell derived heart cells or induced pluripotent stem cell derived cardiomyocytes, which is fancy way to say patient specific personalized beating heart cells, human heart cells, importantly. So we had this model system already, and I had an interest already, and I basically wanted to use this model system to study what's happening to the cells of the human heart in space. So we put two and two together, and then over the course of a few years, we fleshed out this project. And of course, huge support to the ISS National Lab as well as our partners BioServe and Stanford as well. And we launched the project in 2016.
And one of the things I also remember about that project too was it got a pretty viral moment from NASA astronaut Kate Rubins when she was on station and she's seeing this happen in real time and just the general reaction she had was just, oh my gosh, this is so cool. As a researcher, when you're launching an investigation like that up and you see the astronaut engaging with your project and having that type of a visceral response, did that moment really kind of resonate with you as, wow, we're doing something that's really out of the box and really cool?
Yeah, I mean, it was the coolest experience of my scientific career up to that point, and maybe even till now. I think we were so fortunate to have Kate work on that project because, she's not only a NASA astronaut, but also has a tremendous background in biomedical research. She's been doing this longer than I have. And to see her excitement about our project and to see her fully invested in the work that we're doing and seeing the value of the work that we're doing was really special.
So that was the initial investigation in 2016, I want to say. Now we're in 2025. Since that time frame, you've had the opportunity to launch a slew of other investigations at the station. Can you maybe talk about how things have evolved from that initial project to the types of R&D that you're doing on station now? And maybe also even talk about how the space station itself has evolved, like the types of facilities that are able to support this type of R&D.
Yeah, things have become busy. I'll say that much. Back when I was doing that project, I believed in the project, of course, and all of you guys believed in it, but a lot of folks didn't really get it. They didn't understand why we're doing this project and the relevance it might have for human disease and human biology. But I think a lot of folks have jumped on the train over the last 10 years. Access to station has improved dramatically, but as a result, I think, the number of projects going up there has also increased dramatically. So, sometimes we do have a bit of a backlog in trying to get up there, but, there are other ways to get around that, I suppose. And there's also, like what you're alluding to, there's been an evolution in the capabilities aboard the International Space Station. So, back then we were using, pretty relatively straightforward standard hardware from BioSurf, for example, that had been around for years. But now we have more advanced microscopy capabilities. We can use standard commercial off-the-shelf hardware or lab hardware that we have every day in our laboratory, which I think democratizes the science that we can do on the ISS. So we don't necessarily have to worry as much about these custom pieces of hardware. We might be able to use something like a 96 well plate, which is something that we use all the time in our biosciences laboratory here on the Earth. So the technical capabilities have definitely improved. The number of folks doing research in the stem cell field and the greater biomedical research field has dramatically gone up. And certainly there are other platforms that are coming online as well, which is very cool to see.
One could then make the argument then, since you've been doing this for about a decade now, that you are one of the kind of pioneers in a sense of looking at stem cell research in space. And before we got on record, we were talking about you were just recently at a conference out in Hong Kong with some of the more aforementioned stem cell researchers in the world. Uh, can you maybe describe how it is that they now look at space as a conduit for supporting stem cell research or for driving personalized medicine concepts?
Yeah, I think folks in stem cell biology see space as an accelerant in more ways than one. So when I was doing my initial study back in 2016, we just wanted to see, what is the impact of microgravity on the cells of the human heart? Pretty simple, straightforward question. But other folks are utilizing microgravity as an accelerant for studying tumor progression, cancer progression, and trying to develop anti-cancer drugs. There's folks like myself in our laboratory and other folks around the country who are using microgravity to grow three-dimensional tissues, organoids, and bioprinting, and these really advanced biomedical applications. There's a lot going on out there, and of course, there's folks in biotech. A number of biotech companies that are using microgravity to create unique bioproducts. Protein crystallization has, of course, always been a big thing. The applications are tremendous, but for the cell biology and stem cell side of things, I'm personally the most excited about biomanufacturing in space. So what can we do up there that we can't do down here? And I think we've had a few wins so far, but I think we're just really we're scratching the surface of this area.
So there's two things you said that I want to tap into. One, you mentioned kind of an accelerant, and is it safe to say? Because one of the ways that I always think about it from a lay perspective is that not only is space something that can accelerate the ability for you to find a possible drug target or candidate, but it also accelerates your ability to find something that is not a drug candidate, so that instead you're not spending multiple hours, years on something that might not ultimately be viable.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it depends on the application, and I can provide a couple of examples. I mean, I'm a cardiac biologist, a musculoskeletal biologist, right? And the analogy is that, 6 months of, stem cell culture or heart cell culture in space is equivalent to 10 years on the ground, right? So you get those phenotypes, those observations way faster in space than you can on the ground. Which exactly what you're alluding to accelerates the drug development timeline. And the other really important thing to think about is, say we're trying to identify a drug candidate that would improve heart function or musculoskeletal function in space. Of course, those same drugs can be used for treating diseases here on the ground too, because all of us are undergoing aging, unfortunately. Osteoporosis, sarcopenia, these diseases of the musculoskeletal system are happening all the time on the ground, and it can take decades, it can take many years for those drugs to progress through clinical trials. And so, in the biomedical field arena, we're all looking for ways to accelerate those timelines. And space could be a natural accelerant for that.
So the 6 months, 10 years, that wow, that jarred me. And I know that that is a big driver of the accelerating, but I think that that then taps also into the next portion I was going to ask you about, where one of the areas you were very excited in was the realm of in-space manufacturing, and maybe talking about how in-space manufacturing could be an accelerator for patient care on Earth as well as beyond.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, this is something I'm really passionate about. We've been fortunate to be funded by the ISS National Lab as well as NASA to do multiple studies on in-space biomanufacturing. We've got projects lined up for this year and have multiple launches conducted over the last few years. Um, on the stem cell side of things, we're all looking for ways to improve the model systems that we use. And one thing that's really hot right now in stem cell biology are organoids, these three-dimensional models, amalgamations of real human tissue. So like I said, I'm a heart biologist. We can make heart organoids, these clumped up three-dimensional beating heart tissues derived from patient-specific human stem cells. All right. Sounds like science fiction, but it's something that we do all the time in our laboratory. And there are certain limitations in terms of how well you can make these cells on the ground. Of course, when we make them, we basically grow them in suspension. They're floating around in our labs here on Earth, but to make them really well, you have to do things like spin them in a flask and these really artificial approaches. And the thought we have is doing some of these organoid production techniques in space because you have a more organic way of making these three-dimensional tissues. You just seed the organoids, you naturally see them come together in the presence of microgravity, and perhaps they can be better, they can be more functional, they can be better vascularized, which means they have more blood vessels in them. These are all things that we're just starting to figure out, but we are really excited with what we're seeing in space.
Now, are those from previous investigations we were talking about? Because as you alluded to, and obviously, things change in the flight manifest, but we are anticipating that your team at Cedars-Sinai will be launching an investigation later on this year that is in collaboration with both NASA as well as the ISS National Lab. Can you maybe give a little background and insight into what it is you'll be exploring on that particular investigation?
Yeah, sure. So the investigation we're going to be launching in the next few months, hopefully, is the first organoid production in space from scratch. So we're doing the whole production, going straight from pluripotent stem cell to heart organoid and also brain organoids. These two really powerful systems that we use for drug discovery and disease modeling here on the ground. And like I just alluded to, we have a hunch that the way they can be made in space is better than how they can be made on the ground. Just because, space is that accelerant, things naturally just float around and come together more organically in space. And we're going to get an answer to this over the next few months.
Are you testing any like active like candidates, drug candidates, or is this more this time around it's more exploratory and then in the future we intend to dive a little bit deeper into things?
Yeah, for this upcoming launch, it's going to be just looking at the production of the organoids, but we actually do have a subsequent mission, an ISS National Lab Igniting Innovation Award that was funding the subsequent mission. That's going to look at drug discovery as well. So, in addition to making the organoids and the spheroids, we're going to be adding candidates that may be able to improve their function. So, like for example, on the heart, these heart cells are beating, right? Could we make them beat better in space to counteract potentially some of the negative impacts of microgravity? And similarly, we're going to do that sort of work for the brain organoids as well. So it's the production first. First, we got to validate that they actually are able to be made better in space, and then the next side of it is the drug development side of it.
One final question from my end, and then we'll run into a break. And again, it's more about the accelerator concept, but when we hear about therapeutics and going through the FDA process, we hear, man, it's a years long, 10 years potentially, maybe longer than that. And while we're talking about space though as an accelerant, one could also make the argument, well, wouldn't space make it longer in the long run to get something approved through the FDA process? But it sounds to me as though in some ways some of the things we're doing might actually, knock that timeline off. So if you're a researcher and you have the ability to do something in space and getting that approved through the FDA process might only take, 6 to 8 years as opposed to 8 to 10 or 12 to 15 years. I mean, wouldn't that be something that you would think would open up the doors for a lot of other people to want to jump on board with?
For sure. And, there is a newfound interest in developing these alternative model systems. So, like organoids, organ on chips, this is something that the US government has really invested a lot of time and effort into looking at alternatives to animal models, for example. And if we can show that we can make these model systems like organoids better in space, then that's going to help that drug development process, certainly. I'll give another example. Like I've said a million times, I'm a heart biologist, but I work with other folks who are, say, neuroscientists. My current boss, Clive Svensson, here at the Cedars-Sinai Regenerative Medicine Institute, he focuses on diseases of neurodegeneration. Okay, and the problem is there. This is affecting a lot of people on Earth. A lot of us know folks who have, are dealing with Parkinson's or ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, so on. But there's not great drugs to target those diseases, and this is a huge area of interest for biotech right now. One thing he's really excited about, and kind of the basis of a future mission, is to explore those ALS or neurodegeneration phenotypes observations faster in space. So those these are diseases that often take many years to manifest in people, and potentially decades, right? But like we were talking about, space is an accelerant. So one thing we're really interested in seeing is sending, say, organoids developed from people who have these diseases. And perhaps in space, we can see that timeline shrink of when those Alzheimer's or Parkinson's phenotypes observations show up. So maybe we could cut uh, that process down by an order of magnitude. In a situation on the ground where somebody may experience the disease after 30 years, maybe in space you can see it after a few months. And if that's the case, then that drug development timeline also shrinks. So again, these are things that we have to explore, but we're really excited about the possibilities.
Awesome. So I think with that, I mean, there's so much more that we can get into right now, but maybe we'll take a quick break. But when we do come back, there was kind of a method to the madness of asking that last question. There might have been some strategery in mind, so we'll ask Arun a little bit about his next venture, and then he also talked a bit about Hunts Vegas. We'll talk about his rocketry roots and maybe even get into some Duke basketball because I know that that's near and dear to his heart. And welcome back to Between a Rocket and a Hard Space. Let's continue our conversation with Arun Sharma. So, Arun, before we broke, I kind of teased out new ventures. So, last month, your team unveiled the Center for Space Medicine Research at Cedars-Sinai. Can you talk a little bit about this center and your vision for this initiative?
Yeah, for sure. It's a really exciting time here at Cedars. We've been doing work on ISS and some biosciences research for space biosciences research for years now, 5 years plus, and um, we've been really well supported, not just by my direct boss, Clive Svensson, the head of our regenerative medicine institute, but Cedar Sinai as a whole really believes in this area of study. They see the potential of it. So, thanks to institutional support and thanks to support from Clive Svensson, we've started the Center for Space Medicine Research, which, basically has two major pillars. One is to keep doing what we're doing and exploring the possibilities for in space biomanufacturing and disease modeling in space. And, we talked about some of the possibilities with organoid biology, with cardiac and neurodevelopmental disorder modeling in space. We've talked about that a little bit, but we're going to keep on doing that sort of work. The second part of it is the educational side. So we want to tell people about this area of study. It's such a hot topic, and there's a lot of interest, especially at the junior level, the trainee level. There are folks who want to have degrees potentially in space biosciences. And so we actually have a brand new master's program in regenerative medicine that we're starting here at Cedars-Sinai. And as an element of that, we're going to be including a space biosciences course and potentially an opportunity to have a certificate as well. So people can subspecialize in this area. And there was no one better to really kick this off than someone we've already talked about here on the show, and that's Kate Rubins. So she was the kickoff keynote speaker for the Center for Space Medicine Research, and she gave just an incredible talk, really well attended. There were 500 people in the audience about the various applications, various things that she's been doing on and off the planet. And like I said, she's a bioscientist herself, so she can really speak to the public here. She's a colleague of ours, so. We're really excited to get this started, and thanks to support from the ISS National Lab, NASA, all of our partners, we're going to keep it going.
It had to have been a full kind of circle moment though, right? To have you're opening up your new institute and to have Kate be out there knowing that Kate was the one that was helping to support your first investigation on station, that had to have felt pretty cool on the insides.
It was very special. It was a really special moment. And yeah, like I said, I couldn't think of anybody better to kick this off. It's been 10 years. It's been an incredible ride, but we're just as excited for the next 10 years.
I can only imagine over the next 10 years, it's going to get better and better and better as we learn more and more and more. So, I guess with that in mind, as you alluded to, we do have a lot greater access to the space environment, to the space station, which is now operational through 2030. We have other platforms in LEO that are starting to emerge. Now, that said, though, there's still some challenges that might be in the future for the biomedical research community in leveraging low Earth orbit or the space station, et cetera. Can you maybe address some of those challenges and how your team might try to combat those?
Yeah, one thing is the reproducibility of the science, the throughput of the science. A lot of experiments that have been done have been what we call an N of one, or only one experiment's been done without reproducing it. I mean, when we do science here on the ground, the standard is we want to reproduce something at least three times, right, to get statistical significance. And with the space biosciences research on ISS, other platforms, of course, logistically, that's tough. But there are ways that you can get around that. For example, a project that we just published on, and we were talking about this before the show, is using commercial off-the-shelf hardware for space biosciences research. So what do I mean by that? When we do biosciences research, cell biology here on the ground, we're growing cells in, for example, 96 well plates, right? Typically, when you grow cells in plates and you try to take them to the space station, you open the lid, the nutrients they might escape into space because of microgravity, and no one's going to like that, right? But we figured out a trick that we can actually use these 96 well plates to grow cells in a fully contained format in space, in microgravity, thanks to surface tension, which is basically keeping that liquid, those nutrients in those wells. And that we think that's a great way to increase the throughput of the science that we do. So instead of having just three replicates in a plate like we did in that 2016 mission, we can have 96 replicates, right? Which really allows us to scale up the reproducibility of our experiments, allows us to have more variables. And because, like I said, this is commercial off-the-shelf hardware that we use every day in our laboratory, we can use terrestrial workflows too. So maybe some of the equipment that we use every day in our lab, like high-throughput screening devices and so on, now that we can use these off-the-shelf plates, we can introduce some of that equipment to the ISS as well. So my dream is, to have the exact same lab that we have down here, up there, and I think that'll really help with the reproducibility and scalability of our experiments.
It's kind of like how I've talked about it with a lot of friends in the past, where the beauty of the space station, we talked about the evolution of it over time, is that now it's not just a novel place to do R&D, but it's a novel place to do R&D that has many of the same bells and whistles that you might have in a normal laboratory setting, which will allow for greater capacity for discovery. But what you're talking about with like the commercial off the shelf, would that encompass astronaut crew time, or are those things that can just be done with minimal crew time?
Yeah, I mean, potentially both, right? Of course, we've loved working with our astronaut partners. We've loved working with Kate, for example, who's had a biomedical training as well. But they're busy. They're doing a lot of projects. They're doing a lot of other things, maintenance, all this kind of stuff, important stuff on the space station and other platforms. So, ideally, I want this to shift to a high throughput automated approach, right? That would allow for true independence in terms of the experiment that we're conducting, and, it gives us more dedicated time to do these projects, right? I imagine, again, thinking about dream scenarios here, you could have multiple, like, shoe boxes almost, where you have, say, a 96 well plate that's growing organoids in microgravity, and in that shoebox, you have fluid handling, you have microscopy, you have high throughput, analyses of beating heart cells or neurons, like, all the systems that we are starting to automate on the ground. I want to bring those to microgravity and to space. And we're exploring a lot of this with our biomanufacturing center here at Cedars-Sinai, which is a cutting edge facility looking at cell manufacturing, and they've actually done some projects on ISS as well. But they're really excited about the possibility of automating workflows both terrestrially and in space. So I think automation is the way to go.
I would agree with you, and there's plenty of automated facilities we have on station where in some ways it's almost like using the Ghostbuster analogy where you stick it in the shoebox and then you flip the switch and it's good to go, and then the astronauts can go and work on a variety of other investigations along the way. So
Yeah.
hopefully there'll continue to be more of those types of facilities, whether it be on this station or beyond.
Yeah,
Uh,
and don't get me wrong. Again, I want to emphasize that the astronaut partners are phenomenal, and sometimes it takes a trained eye, like Kate had, for example, to see an observation that's happening to ourselves in space and perhaps adjust the experiment in response. That's a lot of what we do on the ground is we make an observation. Oh, that looks different. That looks interesting. Let's adjust our experiment. And being able to do that on the fly is a reason why you still might want to have, of course, astronauts doing your hands-on experiments. But for the purposes of scalability, throughput, I think for the future, automation will be the way to go.
So you touched on something that wasn't really part of my questions, but the notion of iteration. And I think
Mhm.
that with a lot of science we've seen in the early stages of the space station, goes up there. Yeah, the astronaut might be performing it. There might be the ability for some video, some audio, some camera technology, but not a ton. There's not a lot of great bandwidth capabilities that had been in the early stages of station. Now we're starting to get to that point where there are better ways of either edge computing or bandwidth capabilities or AI even. Uh, how can something like that assist in research that you're doing or that others might be doing so that we could potentially iterate that science on station while it's up there so that it's not having to come back down and be evaluated and then wait a couple years to fly again?
Yeah, I think that bandwidth point is really important. I mean, some of the data sets that we obtain for biomedical research are absolutely massive, especially when it comes to imaging, and especially when it comes to microscopy, and also for genomics. The some of the standard workflows that we do here on the ground, especially like when it comes to beating heart cells, is we take a video of it. Again, those video files can be very large. We do high resolution imaging, confocal microscopy, again, massive images. And then we do genome sequencing and transcriptomic and RNA sequencing analyses, which can be terabytes and terabytes of data. So the thought, again, going back to a point I made earlier, is to have these same workflows be available at the point of the experiment on ISS. And if you can have improved bandwidth, then the sky's the limit, right? Like you're not limited by those terabytes and terabytes of
You're just
data.
creating
So
more shots on goal to be able to build on your
exactly,
science.
exactly.
Awesome. Okay, we're going to switch a little bit of gears now. So you mentioned it earlier. You are from Hunts Vegas. Can you maybe talk about life as little Arun and your upbringing and what ultimately got you excited about the sciences in the first place?
Yeah, for sure. It was a really special place to grow up, and I don't know if they still call it Hunts Vegas, but I've heard that term more than once, so we'll call it Hunts Vegas for now. Rocket City, USA is what most people call it. But yeah, so my family moved to Huntsville when I was really young, like 2 years old, and My dad actually did some work, collaborative work with NASA. He works at one of the local universities on fiber optics and sensor design, and obviously Marshall Space Flight Center is right there. So he did a lot of collaboration. And as a kid, it was just a really special place to grow up. I mean, I grew up every Wednesday morning to like I woke up to the sound of a boom, and a lot of people won't know what that boom was, but in Huntsville, we all knew what that boom was. It's the sound of rocket engines being tested at Marshall. And funny enough, I never actually got to go on site at Marshall Space Flight Center until I was an adult, even though I live literally 3 miles off of campus. The U.S. Space and Rocket Center is right there, which is great. I actually never went to space camp, because my parents thought it was too expensive, but instead they told me to go volunteer at the Space Center, which I did. So every summer I would, spend a few months at the Space Center showing people around, giving tours. It was just a very special place to grow up. And sometimes when people think of cities in the U.S. associated with the space program, they think, I don't know, like Houston, right? Houston, they think of Cape Canaveral, but I'd like to think of Huntsville because, it's a small town, only a few 100,000 people, but everyone there is involved with the space program in some way. And like I went to, let's see, Chaffee Elementary School, Challenger Middle School, Gus Grissom High School. So it's just in the DNA of what that place is.
Absolutely. I would say that NASA would not be NASA if not for the great efforts of individuals that were over in the Huntsville area and over at Marshall Space Flight Center and building out rockets.
Absolutely. We can attribute a lot of the success we've had in the space program to this small town in Alabama, and I'm proud to call it my hometown.
But then after you decided that you wanted to go be a Dookie. So let's talk about your time at Duke University. What's your favorite college hoops memory?
Oh man. Well, yeah, I mean, growing up in Alabama, like we don't have a lot of pro sports teams or really any pro sports team. It's basically Alabama football, which is kind of a pro sports team in itself. Or, Duke basketball was always on the TV when I was growing up. And so I grew up a Duke basketball fan. It's just, a couple of states down the road in North Carolina. And then I also realized, oh, wait, Duke is actually a pretty good school too. So maybe I should apply there. And I'm glad I did. It was an awesome place to get trained as a biomedical scientist. Duke Medical School and Duke Medicine is one of the greatest hospitals in the country in terms of the volume, in terms of the cutting edge research that's being done there. And that's where I first developed a love for cardiovascular biology and studying stem cell biology too. One of my professors, Ken Poss, he worked on a really cool model system studying zebrafish. And one of the cool things about zebrafish is that zebrafish hearts regenerate, whereas the human heart doesn't. And as somebody who grew up on sci-fi, I thought that was the coolest thing. And that's why I decided to become a cardiac biologist because, my dream was, oh man, I want to harness that regenerative capacity in the zebrafish heart and bring it to humans. Of course, that really hasn't happened yet, but we've got other cool things happening like stem cell biology and all this other stuff, right? So yeah, I mean, on the scientific and training side of things, Duke was just the perfect place for me, and the basketball side of things, you can't really beat it either. My favorite memory was, of course, in 2010 when we won the national championship, and I was on campus for that, and it was just a week straight of partying. And it's again a part medicine, research, and basketball are basically the culture that defines the fabric of Duke, just like Rockets define Huntsville.
Great segue. Love that. So going back then to young Arun in Huntsville, or even for that matter, any other young career scientist interested person, what would you tell them if they had a desire to want to get involved in space-based research?
Yeah, I think this might be kind of cliche to say, but you might see it in this interview. I'm just very passionate about the work that I do. I love stem cell biology, I love heart biology, and I love space sciences. So I try to go all in on each of those things and go 110% on understanding how the human heart works, how we can harness, space to study stem cell biology. And it might sound crazy to do these things independently and beyond that trying to find a way to connect all of them, but that's what I've done over the years, and that's kind of all started because I have this just passion for this area of study. So Uh, Again, cliche to say, but focus on what you're passionate about because that's what's going to drive you and that's going to what's going to make you go 110% into it.
Well, great words. We appreciate the time, but now we're going to move into the rapid fire part of the conversation. This is done so that way we can get a bit more insight into the psyche of Arun, even though I think that we've done a pretty good job of tapping into some of this. So that said, again, this is rapid fire. So what's your favorite movie or favorite movie series? Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Wars. I mean, I guess, a millennial, so Star Wars is kind of my default. I do love Star Trek, and I've seen some of the movies. I haven't seen the shows as much, but I grew up on the second trilogy, the earlier trilogy for Star Wars. So I'll have to say Star Wars.
Are you more Luke or Han Solo?
I'm gonna say Han Solo, more of that
You're a
rebel,
renegade?
that the free thinker, you know what I mean? So I love Luke. He's the ultimate good guy, but I see myself as a bit of a rebel. So Han.
Yeah. Got a couple of other questions about movies because these came out at basically the same time frame. What's the better movie, Armageddon or Deep Impact?
I'm gonna say Armageddon, just personal preference.
Contact or Gattaca?
Gattaca. Part of it is, as a biomedical scientist, like I've been exposed to Gattaca so many times. I feel like I've watched Gattaca in every single biology class I've ever been in ever since high school, and it was a very prescient movie. It sort of predicted the future in a lot of ways. It predicted the rise of genome editing, for example, and human modification. So um, it gave a lot of food for thought even when it came out, and it's been very interesting to see some of those things become a reality.
Is there a movie that inspired you as a child to get into the sciences?
Movie that inspired me as a child to get into the sciences. You know, I'll say again because it came out when I was young. Star Wars Episode One. I mean, yes, it's more science fantasy than anything, the Force and all that. But just the concept of like spaceships and all. Honestly, I'll say gaming probably inspired me more than movies. I used to be a big time PC gamer, and one of my favorite games growing up was this game called Homeworld, where where it's basically following a fleet of spaceships as they go from one planet to another. I've always been a big time gamer, and gaming or movies or whatever, there's so many different opportunities to get inspired by science and get into it that way. So that's how I got into it.
Let's get into some sports now. In 1992, who did Duke basketball beat to win the national championship?
1992 was okay, was it for the second championship? It's either Kansas or Michigan. Was it? Oh man. I'm gonna say, oh no, no, because the first time UNLV was 91, and I'm gonna say Kansas.
The Fab Five, Michigan.
It was Michigan. Okay, I knew it was one of the two. Okay.
Yeah. All right. When was their last national championship?
Oh come on, 2015.
Is JJ Redick doomed for failure as head coach of the LA Lakers?
You know what? I can't hate on my guy JJ. I mean, he's just a legend. Greatest scorer in Duke history. I would say probably the best 3-point shooter in college basketball history. It's only been a year. Give him a little time. I think he's a smart enough guy. He's been in the NBA forever. I'm gonna say he's gonna be all right.
Okay. What was the first job that Arun ever had?
First job that I ever had actually was at the Space Center. So if you count, so there's volunteering, but there was also a paid element of it, where I got paid to work at the gift shop and stuff like that. So it actually was at the U.S. Space and Rocket Center in Huntsville.
Okay. And what did you want to be when you were growing up?
I mean, obviously astronaut. If you're growing up in Huntsville, and I still want to be an astronaut. Why not, right? But there's more ways than one to get to that goal these days, right?
Right.
But for me, it's always been scientist in some capacity, whether it's doing science in space or on the ground. Just that idea of doing something that no one's ever done before and making discovery has always attracted me. And I was fortunate enough to grow up in an environment like Huntsville and with a family who's also in science, to help me see that that is a realistic career possibility. So science is kind of what I've always done and what I've always wanted to do.
So, is there anything that you're reading right now that stands out?
Yeah, I listen to a lot of audiobooks. Just because I have really long car rides here in Los Angeles. You know, traffic is part of the fabric. I mean, we talked about rockets being the fabric of Huntsville. Traffic is in the fabric of Los Angeles. One of the audiobooks I really liked recently was Project Hail Mary. Great book, which I think is going to turn into a sci-fi movie with I think Ryan Reynolds or somebody in the near future. So the idea of like a
With
stranded
Ryan
astronaut trying
Gosling,
to
right?
Ryan Gosling. Yeah, that's right. That's right. The idea of the stranded astronaut trying to science his way out of his situations, out of his problems with like some cute
Almost
aliens
like it's
sprinkled
written
in.
by Andy Weir, who did The Martian, right?
Almost, right?
Yeah,
Almost like there's a common thread there. But yeah, I like that one.
cool. Last question for you. What is the name of your podcast and why should people listen to it?
Yeah, so I also host something called the Stem Cell Podcast, which is about stem cell biology, obviously. It's a great way to stay up to date with what's happening in stem cell research, just like this show is a great way to stay up to date with what's happening on the ISS. You can find us on at Stem Cell Podcast online, wherever you get your podcasts. And, we cater predominantly to stem cell scientists, but there might be something in there for everyone. We recap recent papers in the field, and we also talk to the major experts who are doing the work. So check it out if you're into that sort of thing.
Well, there we have it. Arun Sharma, thank you so much. This has been a delight. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Patrick. I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing and supporting our science. And ISS is such an incredible platform, and I hope to keep utilizing it well into the future.
As do we. Thank you so much. More to come.